Yep, that's what's
Oh, there we
happening.
go. You're back. You're back.
You were muted.
Jeremy muted my mic on purpose.
Hey, welcome to Super Social Club. I'm Jeremy.
This is Whisky and 6. I'm Rob.
Welcome to the Whisky Rant Podcast.
It's a little crusty.
It's frustrating.
And it's going to be a little bit of a rant.
I don't understand it. I don't know why.
Some sort of injustice.
Anyway, end rant.
Hello and welcome back to the Whisky Rant Podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Rob.
And tonight we are talking about the news that shocked the world in the whiskey community recently. An article in Whisky Advocate Magazine saying that Gordon and MacPhail is going to cease bottling independent whiskey coming very, very soon and just focus on their two distilleries that they have in production right now.
Yeah, and to help clarify some of the rumors and the nonsense that has been spinning around in the last week, we brought in our boy James, because who knows Gordon MacPhail better than James?
Exactly.
And yeah, James, welcome to the show.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I've heard that there's a drinking game where if you guys say our buddy James, you take a drink.
Well, we have thanked you on many episodes recently for all the bottles you've provided us.
I don't know if I can do that forever, but every time you guys do like a podcast and you'll talk about something, you're like, oh, I wonder what like old Benromach, and I'm like looking at my shelf and being like, well, I've got one right there.
I know you have been so generous. For people who don't remember you, you work for
Authentic
or Experience, and
you can see a lot of my products probably on the shelf behind me.
Yeah,
sure.
There's a ton of Gordon MacPhail, Benromach, Glenallachie. Yeah, those all belong to you.
Rounds out your portfolio. You do represent Gordon MacPhail, so a fitting guest for this topic. So why don't you just tell us a quick synopsis, kind of what the deal is with Gordon MacPhail right now?
Yeah, absolutely. As you might imagine, when that news dropped, especially the way that the Whisky Advocate worded their headline, like it kind of made it sound like they almost made it sound like Gordon MacPhail is like dumping all their casks and starting from scratch. Like that's kind of was like the tagline, the way it sounded. Yeah. So I got a lot of messages saying like, hey, do I need to go and buy like every Gordon MacPhail because like Rob and Jeremy are going to drive the secondary price up? And but thankfully, the truth is that we are not going to see much change. Really, what this means is that Gordon MacPhail really from 1895 have been kind of on this mission of promoting single malt Scotch, and specifically kind of highlighting the way that different distillate works with wood in different ways. And I think historically that's looked a lot of different ways. But, we'll get into some of the detail and some of the history and the context of why I think they went down this road and why they're deciding not to fill from other distilleries anymore. So, yeah, historically, Gordon MacPhail has filled from more than 100 different distilleries. So they're unique from other independent bottlers in that they don't go and buy a cask of whiskey on the secondary market or on a wholesale market. They like show up at the door of the distillery with their own casks that are empty, like basically get them filled from the tap, and then usually either store them right on site or store them in their own warehouse.
Would you say that Gordon MacPhail, on the grand scheme of things, would they be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, independent bottlers and holders of different Scotch whiskeys?
It's a good question. I would think it would be Cadenheads, but I would think they'd be right there.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that Signatory probably has a pretty extensive collection, as does SMWS. Right. I'm sure all four of those names probably have like pretty deep, but like the truth is even Compass Box has like tens of thousands of casks in their warehouse from other distilleries now. So
right.
I think the moral of the story as we get into this is that like things have changed and things are changing. And I think the whiskey business 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, it will look different, and Gordon MacPhail like have kind of this unique perspective that way. Like, we think of Gordon MacPhail as like stuff that's right now, which is like cool old Glen Grants and these, great old sherry matured single cask Macallans that you can seemingly only get from them. And, even 10, 20 years from now, like that's going to look very different.
So do you think it has anything to do with the fact that distilleries are dropping their interest in giving their product. So does that have anything to do with why Gordon MacPhail got ahead of this and said, you know what, I think it's time that we stop, knocking on doors and, basically get ahead of it before we rely too heavily on that, and then it just kind of falls out from under us.
Yeah, it kind of seems like the logical conclusion. I mean, if you, but I don't think it's fully true. And the reason I say that is that they were still filling like dozens and dozens of distilleries even this last year, right?
Okay.
Like there's no shortage of distillate. You can buy distillate, even though the cost of that distillate for them is probably more than the cost it takes to produce their own distillate at Benromach and The Cairn, which is now, fully up and running.
Oh, nice.
So I believe actually that the amount of whiskey being distilled at The Cairn is like more than they were filling, as an independent bottler. So
Okay.
for sure, like, yeah, there's a lot of these little factors, but I think, if you went back in time, Rob, to like the 50s and 60s, like Gordon MacPhail's business was essentially being the single malt bottler for like Glenlivet and Glengrant and Mortlock and Macallan. Like their number one selling SKU was the Macallan.
Yeah.
Macallan single malt, right? Like that was their business model. So in a way, I think that like their business like 20 or 30 years from now actually will kind of look like more like their 1950s business, where they're kind of like providing this alternative. So at the time there was like all these blends and very limited single malts available, and Gordon MacPhail kind of like provided this like gap. And I think that's kind of what they've become in the last 20 or 30 years, which is that like they always say that they like to release things that complement, right? Like things, maybe you get a bottle like that's in your hand of Macallan and it's different than the Macallans you get from Macallan.
Right.
Or, whether it's a Highland Park or a Pulteney, like their idea is always to like kind of show a different side.
Yeah.
Probably the most compelling argument that I heard from them when they told us this in person was that like going forward, that need is going to become redundant. Like the gap in the market of like a wide variety of interesting bottlings from distilleries that you already know, that window is going to narrow because you have all of these new products coming to market.
It's true.
Right?
It's
like,
true.
We are going to be very spoiled for choice. Like you can imagine walking into a shop and thinking, what do I really need, from these distilleries that tend to make, blended whiskey, like an alternate expression of that, which is still cool. But you might also have on the shelf all of these like great releases that will be mature from all these new distilleries that I would argue are making better distillate.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where Gordon MacPhail might look a little goofy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for the viewers who don't necessarily follow everything, essentially what we were talking about in previous podcasts and previous episodes is that whiskey producers in Scotland aren't necessarily selling as much or any more distillate to places like Gordon MacPhail. They
Right.
aren't, selling their casks. They're keeping them for themselves and they're bottling them themselves. So, I mean, what is Gordon MacPhail's official stance on this? Because, like, obviously there's theories. I have a theory of why they're doing it, but what is their official, like, this is why we're doing it? We want to, is it just because we want to focus on our two, distilleries and not focus on this? Like, is it a manpower issue? Is it a capital issue? What is the official stance for them?
Well, again, keep in mind that their production at the Cairn alone this year is bigger than the amount of whiskey they put in bottles as an independent bottler. So you kind of connect the dots. Really, they, fast forward, they will be about Benromach and The Cairn. So they almost won't be unlike, other small whiskey companies, just like Glenallachie or, other companies that have 2, 3, or 4 distilleries that they work with. And I think that they kind of see that the future for them kind of looks more like controlling their own source of distillate. And they have now a fairly wide range, right? I think they feel like they can make everything that they were doing historically now with what they have in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that the value of the variety over time will go down.
I think this is just a true testament to how Gordon MacPhail from a very long time ago has had their finger on the pulse. Knowing
Yeah, to be honest,
exactly,
it does feel like 4D chess a little bit.
right? Yeah,
It does
because because they start the Cairn, they bought Benromach, what 50, well, how many years ago? 20,
early
well,
90s?
almost 20 years ago.
93.
93.
It's 30 years ago.
30
Oh,
years.
30 years ago. Sorry,
Yeah.
my bad. So 30 years ago they bought Benromach, very unique distillery.
Mhm.
Starting the Cairn to taste more like, if I'm like, tell me if I'm wrong, but like more like a unpeated Highland kind of taste. Like,
Yeah, no, I can describe
comparable.
the Cairn. I did try the new make from the Cairn, and talk to some of the production team there. And what they were trying to do is kind of like they did with Benromach. Like Benromach, they were trying to create this style of Speyside whiskey that kind of doesn't exist anymore. Like something that's kind of like rustic, lightly peated, kind of feels a little dirty. Like it just has more like feel to it.
Right.
Which of course used to be more common, right? Like even like the Glenlivet and Glen Grants they were filling were peated, right? I think that the Cairn is an effort to kind of tap into maybe the way that some of these distilleries were like kind of like pre 1970s. So, distilleries like Linkwood and Glen Grant were making distillate that like had a little bit more tooth to it.
Right.
And that matured equally well in sherry and American oak, and really like kind of had a long-term kind of feel to it. And you can see, right, like those Glen Grants are like still plugging away like decades and decades later, and same with Macallan. So yeah, I think there's a part like old school Macallan, a part old school Glen Grant, a part old school Linkwood in kind of the soul of the Cairn.
That's really
And that's
cool.
the benefit they have. I mean, they have samples of new make from Macallan and Linkwood and Glen Grant like from the 50s and 60s on their premises.
That's crazy.
So that's the target.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess like one theory that I had, I mean, because this came as a shock, and I'm like, why wouldn't you just do it all? Why wouldn't you just continue to do everything you're doing, including production of the new distilleries? And is it a wood issue? Is there a cask shortage? And if we're only getting this many casks, why not use these casks as fill for our distilleries and forget about filling them up with Caol Ila or whatever other distillate we can get? If we're not going to get distillates that are necessarily new and exciting, and it's not going to appeal necessarily to the market, why waste a really good cask on not our distillate? Why not just focus on our stuff and use the cask that we can get towards that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I kind of thought that too. Yeah, in the official material, like, they sent us like a fact document, and like it specifically says like, look, it's not a cask issue. Like we can get more casks. That's not a problem. They have good relationships. At the end of the day, like they are not that big. There are distilleries that are using, 10x the amount of casks that they're using.
Wow.
Now that said, this wasn't explicitly said to me, but at the same time, like adding the Cairn into their production, like dramatically increases the amount of whiskey that they're putting into cask. So I'm sure that part of this, the bigger kind of solution here is realizing that we don't need to like overnight double the amount of whiskey we're putting away.
Right.
Like that, like just from a business sense, like it feels kind of weird to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just overnight, like instantly, like double your production. And I know the Scotch business has done that many times in the past, but again, I think, Gordon and MacPhail has more of a long-term view, and they're realizing like, look, we can, still grow our business now having these two distilleries, but then also with the stock that they have, they can continue to release these awesome aged single malts from other distilleries over the next like 50 years.
Yeah.
Right. And as you said before, we're not really going to see a reduction in the amount of Gordon MacPhail because they have stuff barreled and ready to go for the next 20 plus. Well, you said up to, some stuff they'll keep for 50, 60,
yeah, I mean,
70
this year,
years, right?
Like this year, they filled Morlock, they filled Linkwood, they filled Caol Ila from 2023, right? Like,
yeah,
that's, we get to drink that over the rest of our lives. It's our kids and grandkids that maybe don't benefit. But then again, who's to say what the whiskey landscape looks like in 40 years? And that's
Sure.
where I think Gordon MacPhail is, I think they do look into the future and see that there's a lot of other whiskey coming online. There's, regionality. I mean, you've got Shelter Points behind you. Like things are moving a bit, and it can't just be 1983 forever in the Scotch business, even though I think there's part of us, to be honest, everyone that messaged me that was sad about Gordon MacPhail and this change, like there was nostalgia in their tone.
Yeah,
which to me right away is a red flag. Like, you know, I think there's a cooler head prevailing idea here.
absolutely. And like you said, because of that nostalgia, really, what will our kids know of that? Nothing, right? Like,
Well,
No, they'll have lots of great whiskey in front of them.
exactly.
And if you think about it, like during this whiskey boom, and Gordon and MacPhail's no different, you know, now everyone is filling their malt into great casks. Like that wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
You know, Gordon and MacPhail had this niche of like interesting distillate in all like good quality casks. Like there's a lot of people doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, they can still have a niche by kind of appealing to this kind of old school Scotch lover with Benromach and the Cairn.
For sure.
So in a way, what they'll be offering, you could argue again, like I said before, is more akin to what they would have been offering in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 20 years from now.
yeah, no, super interesting, and we're very excited to try some of that stuff when it comes to age.
Yeah, that being said, because you did mention Macallan being one of the major ones back then. We have a Macallan here.
Yeah, we got 5 really nice
Yeah, we
bottles
should-
in
we
front of
should-
us right now.
Yeah, we should
Yeah,
introduce.
we should go
what
through
we
and
have.
say what we're tasting. I'm happy to go first. I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
actually, Jeremy, one of the questions you had was about like the relationship between filling, because it is kind of strange, right? It's like, why does Diageo let these guys like roll into Morlock Distillery, which isn't even open to the public, and say like, yeah, help yourself to like 50 casks full,
Right.
like we'll be fine. Like it doesn't make any sense, right? Now, do I think that Gordon and MacPhail also foresees that even stuff like that could get shut off in the future? Probably.
Right.
Right. But again, they're ahead of the game, not behind it. So on that note, the first whiskey I poured, I kind of thought that if I was on with you guys, I had to have something from Billy Walker, even though it's not Glenallachie. So this is the Benromach 2005. So this would have been filled at Benromach after Billy Walker took over, and after they changed the distilling regime there a little bit to try to get a little bit more of a full-bodied and fruity spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is from a refill American Hogshead at 15 years old. And I think what this speaks to is like the reputation that Gordon and MacPhail has, and how people in the business like understand the symbiosis between what they do and how they've kind of built single malt into what it is. Because the fact that Billy Walker, like right away after he did this, was like, no, I want some of my fluid to go to Gordon and MacPhail.
Yeah.
Like that's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's not intuitive, right?
That's true. Yeah, Billy Walker, I mean, he knows he can do great things with whatever he has. So obviously, you know, it's probably for him a little bit nostalgic to give Gordon MacPhail some liquid as well, right?
And do you know if Gordon MacPhail went over to Glenallachie and got any of the newer distillate from them in the last couple of years?
It's a great question. A lot of that stuff, it's kind of, the company's pretty tight-lipped on. I do know that definitely some of the new distilleries that have popped up in the last decade are filling or did fill, I guess would be the better tense of the verb now.
Yeah.
So, you know, Gordon MacPhail has some of these new distilleries in their warehouse. But of course we won't see them for a while yet.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. Like a new distillery. I mean, obviously Glenallachie was established before, but if a new distillery
they have lots of
needs
old
some capital.
They have lots of Glenallachie from pre Billy Walker in their warehouse for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, if a newer distillery needs the capital, I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Sell some of their distillate to eager hands willing to take it
Off the hop, especially when they need it, right?
Oh yeah, I will absolutely take it. So yeah, this one, I think this Benromach, it kind of like strikes the notes in terms of kind of Gordon MacPhail's like missive, which is to, you know, showcase distillate in its kind of natural sense, but in something a little bit different, right? So like a single bourbon cask like this, I mean, it's very, very rich, very decadent, like lots of like kind of that like almond pastry kind of notes.
Nice.
But then like tons of fruit underneath.
What else you got over there?
So yeah, bottle 2, I picked, I felt like this kind of was important to pour today. So this is a Highland Park 1998. And this was the first cask that I picked after I started working for Gordon and MacPhail 3 years ago. So this was one of those moments where like I got an email saying like, hey, do you want to like bottle a whole cask for Canada? And I was like, what? Do I want to, what? And then, you know, the lists are kind of crazy, right? Like there's all sorts of things on the list. It's not a super long list, but you kind of have to go through. And the one that stuck out to me was this Highland Park 1998, and it is from a refill or a first fill bourbon barrel. So this is a little bit unusual, right? Like, have you guys ever had a 22-year-old Highland Park from First Fill Bourbon.
I
And
think
I know
we
Jeremy's
might
thinking about
have.
Highland Park the Light. I
Maybe
can
not
see
Yeah,
you
20
I
guys.
was gonna say, like, what's Highland Park the
Maybe
Light?
not.
Because that's
Yeah,
a
that's
17-year-old, and it's not all ex-bourbon,
It's
is it?
refill sherry, I think.
It's a refill sherry.
So this, fortunately, at the time, I had the cask sample, and I also had a bottle of the Light. And
Yeah.
obviously, this is 5 years older, but this is like a turbocharged version of Highland Park the Light, which I love.
Nice. Yeah, that was great.
So I was like, this is a no-brainer. Like, it's got all that like tropical fruit. It's like really fresh, like just that hint of smoke. So
It's
yeah, I
crazy what
kinda thought-
happened. Sorry, I was just saying it's crazy what's happened to Highland Park because it was such a sought after bottle up until like 4 years ago,
Yeah,
and now nobody cares.
yeah, it's true. It has really
well,
fallen
these
off.
Gordon and MacPhail Highland Parks, like every
Oh,
single
yeah.
one I've tried, they're lights out. Every single one.
Oh yeah, no, and I've had actually, I think it was a 17-year-old as well, Gordon MacPhail Highland Park, and that was excellent.
Yeah, like some of the notes in here are just things that I find like increasingly, especially in OB, like just so hard to get. Like it's just like really, really thick, super tropical. Like that like mango kind of papaya, like almost like fudginess that you can get in those old bourbon barrels.
Yeah,
And then like there's this like lovely like whip of smoke that like makes it refreshing at the end. It's incredible.
In our experience with Highland Park independent bottles, they've all really been way outside the distillery profile. They've
Yeah.
been way, way different. Isn't it rare to actually see the Highland Park distillery name on an independent bottle? Usually
I know.
we see
Yeah, they
them
go
just
for those
labeled as
alternate-
like Orkney Islands or
Orkney,
whatever, right?
yeah.
Like
It's-
it is rare. And is that a weird thing that
Yeah.
Gordon MacPhail does with Highland Park? Or
I mean, I think the time frames are so different, right? I mean, two of the Highland Parks that we brought in this year from Gordon and MacPhail were in 1988 and in 1984. So, again, it's like the people that are in charge at Highland Park now, like, weren't even born.
right.
It's
Yeah.
just it's with, as always with Gordon MacPhail, like wrapping your head around the time frames is weird because like I struggle with this too. Like everything in Scotch kind of started with the emergence of Cumbus Box, Bruichladdich, Benromach. It's like a short list, right? When everything kind of like took off.
yeah.
And before that, it's like it's hazy, right? We weren't around in the 90s and the 80s, so
So you got to pick that beautiful Highland Park 22-year-old, and that was what year? When did you get to pick that?
that was in 2020.
2020. Nice.
Very
That's
nice.
awesome.
All right, Rob, why don't you tell them what we got here? Because you went to the archives and picked out a bunch of newer release stuff from Gordon MacPhail.
Yeah, I'll do this quickly because I'm not sure if James has shared all of the ones that he has.
Oh, I'll just quickly share the last one. It's a bit more
Yeah, there you go.
self-explanatory. It's a Macallan, 21-year-old Macallan from the year 2000. This was a cask that was bottled for British Columbia and was in the market. It released last fall in British Columbia. So
Nice.
57.1% from a first fill Oloroso sherry.
Nice.
So before I introduce these, because we have one as well, I did have a question that I keep forgetting about and finally remembered to ask now. The one that you have says distilled in 2000. This one says distilled in 2003. What is the
You got
last?
the new one.
Yeah. So this is a 2022 distilled in 2003.
Oh, where did you get that one from? That's not a Canadian bottling.
This one I got in a trade. I got this one in a trade.
Okay, I believe that's an American bottling.
Yeah, I traded Hazelburn 21 for this.
Okay.
I think. Is that the right trade?
Yeah, I don't know. You said you traded a Hazelburn 21 for something else, the other podcast.
Oh, maybe.
Bison Angel.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so what the heck did I trade for this? It was a trade. I know that for sure, 100%. Oh, my buddy and I traded Thomas H. Handy for this. A Thomas H. Handy off of BTAC.
Yep, nice.
Yeah, so I mean, I was happy with that trade because I mean,
It's a great bottle. Yeah.
this is 19 years old. I'm wondering when was the last cask sold from Macallan to Gordon MacPhail? Like, what's the most recent date we're gonna see?
Yeah, I think the distillate cuts off at 2008.
Oh wow. Okay, so we have a few more years.
Yeah, but not forever.
No,
it's like
well, it
5
seems
more
like
years.
yeah, and they're only releasing these really at like 19, 20, 21, right? So I think no, you said there's
Now, do I
there's
think that they'll hold on to some of these for like 40, 50, 60 years and maybe like, I don't know, sell them to Edrington for like obscene amounts of money? Probably.
why not?
But who knows?
Why not?
It's a good business plan. It's worked before.
It's worked. It seems to have worked before. We don't know. We
I was trying to tell
confirm
them
or
like
deny.
they need to get like a third distillery by like trading old Glenlivet casks for like, I don't know, like Strathisla Distillery or something.
Yeah, just straight cask for distilleries.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I do pick up a hint of sulfur in this one that I've not picked up on any of the other spey malts that I've had.
No, they tend to be very clean. That's something I've noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a hint in this one, but it's not bad.
There was
it's
a
not
touch in the 55.5, but it kind of came across more almost like an earthiness.
Yeah, that 55.5 blew me away. I thought that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Even the one we only had a sample of it from when the tasting that you gave us in like a care package in our hotels. I can't remember what year that one
was. That was the 1999 to 2020, 21-year-old. So that was the
excellent.
first one we released here. And that one was, it reminded me of Tootsie Rolls. Like it had the kind of like malted chocolate flavor. Yeah, and I would say this, the one that I have here, the one that from BC this last year is, it's like very, very like sweet and caramelized.
Nice.
Yeah. Like it almost has that like kind of like vanilla latte with too many pumps in
nice
type of flavor. Yeah.
Yeah. The epitome of the white chick drink.
Yeah.
Is that a bad thing to say? I don't know. I'm white, so
no.
Someone that listens to the podcast is gonna be in line at Starbucks behind you, Rob, and be like, "Hey, did you just order a like 3-pump vanilla latte?"
Yeah, it's weird. Like we don't really run into. I don't really run in. Like very rarely have run into whiskey people. Actually, I was in a mall with my son, and a guy from Iran ran up to me, and he's like, "You are on YouTube." I'm like, "What is happening?"
That's amazing.
I think full accent, and he knew exactly who I was, and it was hilarious because people that live here have no idea who I am.
No. You think that you would maybe see someone in the whiskey aisle at the LCBO and be like, "Oh."
I think people see us, they just like, yeah, I'm not saying hi to that guy.
The only time I ever got approached was at like Spirit Toronto.
Yeah, Spirit Toronto. Yeah,
because we told people we're going there, like, come say hi to us at Spirit Toronto.
True.
And one person did.
Yeah, I was in line once at a whiskey release, like trying to get something just personal, and someone said, "Hey, you're that whiskey guy," and I was like, I kind of remember thinking, like, for those of us that work in the whiskey business, if you're recognized in public, like, our business isn't big enough to merit that type of recognition.
It's true. It's very niche. It's very niche.
So what are the other connoisseur's choice bottlings that you have lined up there?
I actually have a link.
Read them from a distance.
Yeah, so I have a Linkwood over my shoulder, the 15, but I don't know if it would have done well against all these cask strength whiskeys, so we decided to leave it offset. First fill Dalyun. I probably butchered the way that's pronounced, but 2008. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. 13-year-old, 59.4%. It's first fill sherry.
Yeah, that stuff drinks well at 59%, which is shocking.
Yeah, it's super. Like there's some sherry casks that are very caramel forward. This is one of them.
Mm-hmm. This one is one we talked about before. It's a 23-year-old Kulila, a 1997 distillate, first fill sherry. This is amazing.
Yeah. Is that bottled for Canada?
Probably one of the very best bottlings we've brought in the last few years.
Was that exclusive to Canada? That one
is exclusive to North America, but I will say that I was greedy with that one. Truthfully, I mean, it's a big cask. How many bottles does it say?
469 bottles.
Wow.
Yeah, I bet you we brought 250 of those into Canada.
Nice.
Yeah, this one is great.
Went to the US.
And 59.9%
sherry, 20-year-old Isla whiskeys. You just don't.
No, and that the price was really good as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
These two are from Kensington Wine Market, which we've sung praises to for many years
for their picks. Yeah,
for their picks. Mm-hmm. This is a Klein Leash 14-year-old, I believe, 13-year-old. I lied. 2000. 7, 56.5%.
Really like that one.
It was good. And this one is even better.
This one is, I've drank the most out of that so far tonight.
I don't know what's happening. Ever since our little blend to get in, or whatever the hell you want to call it, I've been like just pouring bourbon cask whiskeys lately.
Yeah.
In
Bourbon
the summer,
cask
it appeals
Scotch.
more. It just does.
Right? I think so.
Yeah.
And this Glen Scotia 22-year-old, 56.9%, bottled in 2000. A Kensington Wine Market pick. And honestly, Andrew got lucky with this one.
Yeah.
He got super lucky.
The tropical fruit notes on the finish of this are just bursting on the palate. It's crazy.
Did you guys notice it really needs time to open up a lot?
It
I
does.
thought both
And
of his last casks were like that.
yeah, you can't tell by the fill levels of my bottles anymore, but these have been open for a while.
I'm surprised you haven't taken more out of this one.
But like, look over my shoulder.
I mean,
like,
you have lots to choose from, but
it's not like there's not very much that's at a low fill level here, unless it's been here for almost like a year and a half to 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's just, it is what it is. But this Glen Scotia is probably arguably my favorite on the table right now.
Yep. So
Which
good.
is crazy
Cool.
because I
the
love
Highland
that.
Park that I'm trying has a lot of similarities in terms of that like building tropical fruit on the back end.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
One of the joys that comes along with this job is working with especially retailers, like picking casks, because there is something kind of personal to that. And I mean, thankfully, like that will obviously continue with Benromach and The Cairn. And they have lots of interesting stuff that arguably might be better long term, but kind of getting to kind of look at these different distilleries, and sometimes you might think like, oh, I'm not gonna take a Tormore single cask, and then you try it. There was a co-op Tormore single cask a couple of years ago that just like, imagine that tropical fruit but like turned up to like level 10. Like
Really?
it was insane.
Yeah.
So, and like there's a constant stream of them, like just even now, like Wine and Beyond in Alberta has a 12-year-old Royal Baracla and a 12-year-old Altmore coming in.
Oh, nice.
BSW has this lovely 17-year-old Scapa that has lots of melon, like ripe cantaloupe kind of flavors to it.
Oh, wow.
And a really cool like 26-year-old Glenbergie from a refill bourbon barrel that's just like super aromatic and just delicate.
Is that
Like,
coming in one of these?
There's so much variety.
Will that be coming in one of these shapes, or what?
Yeah.
The fatter, like stubbier bottles?
No,
It's
that shape. Yeah, and of course Kensington Wine Market has like a Bladnoch 1988 in that more stubby, fatter bottle.
Yeah.
It's like a cask that only had 70 bottles, so that's why they took the whole thing. But like, it's just it's fun to do that work and like kind of go through the process. And it's amazing, like sometimes people have even said no to a cask and then someone else has said yes, and like it's kind of cool, that dynamic. And I think like we all naturally, I know you guys for sure have thought this, like if you could like go into like the warehouse at Springbank and you'd find like this perfect honey barrel, but the truth is that like cask selection process isn't really like that.
Yeah.
Like it's not so clearly defined. There's a lot of unique factors, and I think at the end of the day, like the professionals that are like in the lab selecting usually really are better at it. I think that's like a lesson I've picked up.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think many distilleries will let you walk in and say, "Hey, let me try everything," and then and then pick a bottle. And even then,
believe it or not, that happened to me at Benromach, and I actually was able to pick a cask and bottle it. But that's like super unusual.
That's pretty cool. That's a really cool experience. The problem with that experience is, at what point are you blowing your palate? Like, at what point are you like, okay, I've had 17 cask strength whiskeys, and okay, maybe they're a sip or two, but it's like, I don't know, man. Like, maybe that one was the best. Maybe this.
Well, it's funny you say that. The cask that I picked that time at Benromach years ago was it was a 1998 Tawny Port. And at the time, I remember thinking like, wow, this is like so luscious. Like there's just so much going on here. Like I need to bottle this. And a lot of the feedback that people gave me when it came, it actually kind of like, it was tough to hear some of the feedback, because people were saying like, this cask has gone over a little bit, it's a cigar dram. And I know lots of people love that. And there was a lot of people that had good feedback. Yeah. But I think the point was that like, I'd been tasting a lot, and this is 10 years ago.
Right.
And I think my palate was a bit tired. And I think that's part of the process, but
that's
it's
why you say that
cask.
Professionals.
But in
do
my
it
mind,
best,
it was
right?
like the best cask. And that's
Yeah.
that's kind of not like how the process actually unfolds in real time.
Yeah, because when you line up, like we're not like when you line up 5 whiskeys like this, and they're all cask strength, and they're all different in their own way. Are you tasting this Macallan the way it's meant to be tasted on its own? After following it up with, or after having it followed by like whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever order you drink it in, it like by the time you get back to that Macallan, it's not going to taste the same.
It's tasting good to me, I'll tell you
It's
that.
very good. It's very
No
good.
doubt.
But and they're all very good. You know what I mean? But
I'll
it's
address
just,
that specifically. I think there's you guys answered that really well on the last podcast when you talked about how Benromach, like the 10 and the 15 and the 21 at 43%. It's like we all kind of have this thought of like, man, like those would be better if they were 46. That's probably true. But we all, like, if we're being honest, have times where it's like you reach in and you're like, you know what, this 43 is like exactly what I need.
yeah.
So
Definitely.
That's exactly right. And like
I would kind of be sad if that was gone.
it's true. And I mean, my issue, and I would have such a hard time being, even if I had a week to pick a cask, and they're like, you know what, start row by row and then write down your notes and decide from there and narrow it down. Even in a week, I don't think I could do a good job, because I feel like you need to try a whiskey like 4 different ways. You need to have it right out of the barrel at cask strength, barrel proof, and then you need to water it down to
Yes.
like
Watering it down is
50,
crucial.
right?
Yeah.
You gotta water it down to 50. You gotta water it
At
down
least for me.
to, yeah, for sure. And you're not gonna, you need to go through that process for each of the whiskeys, because there could be a point where it's off-putting, right? And like I remember a Linkwood that I bought a long time ago, and at cask strength, it wasn't my favorite. It was like maybe an 85, but then when you added water to that Linkwood, it was like a 92, and it was a significant difference. I've never had such a significant difference in a whiskey in my life, but that was one that really stuck out to me, because I was like, how many times did I go through an entire bottle, didn't play with it at all as far as water goes, and it could have been way, way better if I did, or it could, been way worse. And I know I don't have to add water or whatever, but
Sure.
Yeah, that says a lot to cask picks, because if you open a bottle of Benromach 15, like that first sip, you kind of are like 90% into your opinion of it and your experience. But like that Glen Scotia, like that's a bottle that you drink over many months, and like it slowly unfurls, and your opinion of it, you're right, like goes through phases. Like you're gonna love it and hate it on different nights, and the person who chose that like might have been really convinced, but I think over time, like the excitement you get over one cask versus another, or one bottle being great or another, it kind of tempers a little bit.
There's nights where I come down here, because my wife doesn't want to come down to the basement some nights to watch a movie or whatever, because it's too cold down here apparently. So we have to stay on the main floor to watch a movie some nights. So I'll come down here to pick my one dram, because I'm not going to go back and forth and whatever.
Right.
It's like picking from Netflix over here. And like, I'm like, how do I know I'm going to like that whiskey tonight? Like, what if I don't like that? I get up there, I don't like that whiskey, I got to come back. Like, it's a nightmare.
That's happened to me too, where I'm like, there's so much good stuff to choose from, and then I pour it and I'm like, take one sip, I'm nah, I want something different. It's hard to pick.
No, it's hard.
A big part of the whiskey journey is learning over time, like what you think the type of whiskey drinker you are, and then what you actually become and what you actually do in practice is 2 different things.
Yeah.
Right. Like when you start, I'm sure you guys were the same. It's like you want to buy one of everything because you want to like educate, and you kind of do need to taste everything. Like you need to hammer and forge out your palate. And then you get to a point, like I feel like this, like when I tend to drink whiskey, tends to be kind of later at night, like after dinner, I'm like watching a show or like, I don't know, doing whatever.
Yeah.
And I usually want something that's like at least somewhat special in those moments, and I tend to not drink a ton. So, having like a whole bunch of like 12 and 15-year-old OB bottles is like a real waste on my shelf. But there was a time where that was like all I wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you go through those different phases.
Yeah,
it's true. It is true.
Speaking of phases, what do you think the industry is thinking about this Gordon MacPhail decision? Is there going to be ripples through here? Are other independent bottlers being like, oh, they're making these decisions, so we do the same? Or are other distilleries like, more for us? If Gordon MacPhail's not, filling, then we can maybe take their spot.
I think there's some unanswered questions that, let's say if you're someone who buys not fill, but like casks. So, if you're a signatory SMWS, you can see that like different people are kind of taking different approaches. Like I would argue that SMWS is rebranded themselves as someone who also bottles like world whiskeys. And I think that actually will pay off for them, because like long term, the truth is that there will be great mature casks of Shelter Point and these Australian distilleries and German and Danish distilleries, and like SMWS can bottle those under their own brand, and like they'll be safe, like they don't just need to bottle like old Springbanks to like keep their business going. My guess, I mean, it's tough to know what everyone's thoughts are. I mean, everyone knows that at some point, like the crazy demand, it will peak and start to fall off at some point. I think that doesn't mean that like people are going to stop drinking Scotch, but it does mean that the availability of casks again might kind of come around a little bit. So, my guess is if you're a company that has deep stocks like Cadenheads or maybe, I don't know, Signatory, like the Langs, maybe they just kind of feel like, what, we can wait around and like good whiskey will come back on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again, it's tough to predict. I mean, who knows where the whiskey business is in 10 years? So,
right.
If you can get to that point, and most of those companies, they all have their own distilleries now too, right?
That's true.
They've all gone out and either bought or built their own distilleries. So they've hedged their investment portfolio a little bit more.
Yeah.
And Gordon MacPhail's no different.
I'm gonna sidebar here for a second because I know my voice is getting extra froggy and like hoarse at the moment. And there was a comment made. So to like temper concerns about my health, I've been doing a lot of singing lately, and I'm also a teacher. And like the number 1 and 2 occupations where people tend to have a more hoarse voice is singer and teacher.
Oh, so, yeah. And what's number 3, Rob?
I don't know what number 3 is. I don't know what number 3 is, but I also
the oldest profession ever.
Oh, that's you would know more about that. Mm-hmm. The other thing I noticed I do too is like when I'm teaching kickboxing, like I don't know if you've ever like watched karate or any of that kind of stuff.
You say a lot of hayas?
But it's not haya, but like you do, like especially Thai boxing. There's like you something like that, right? So I'm like, I do everything that's terrible for my voice, including the drinking after, because now we're drinking like 5 cask strength whiskeys after just giving my vocal cords a beating for like, and then yelling at my kids too. Let's not forget about that.
That's true. You punish yourself and then you reward yourself with 60% poison.
Yeah. Right down the gullet. Go and have like an Aaron Rodgers weekend where you like, do some sort of weird psychedelic drug in absolute silence and darkness for a weekend.
I need to do that. I need to, honestly, I've been doing a lot of research on like psilocybin and stuff like that. And I really need to try shrooms. I really do. It's going to happen. Like it's kind of like gray area legal now. Like it's not necessarily illegal.
I think you can legally buy them.
Yeah, you can legally buy them.
In Vancouver, you can legally buy it.
Yeah.
In Vancouver, you can legally buy anything now. Like I think heroin is legal now in Vancouver, I think. But
I don't doubt it.
No, I think that's true, isn't it?
No.
Not heroin?
I mean, you can't just go into a thing and be like, heroin, please, and they just sell it to you. That's not how
I feel like that's how
this is where you're gonna fact check, and there was in fact a place, Jeremy, that had that.
Boom.
No, you have to be part. It's like
Jeremy, they had a sandwich
program.
board. You had a sandwich board on the sidewalk.
You can't.
Yeah, so there's like places in Vancouver because of the amount of people on like hooked on heroin and stuff like that, where you can go and like they administer it to you cleanly so that you don't, right? I think, am I correct on saying that? I think so, right?
Yeah, we're in well over our head now.
We've said too much.
Yeah, why are we? I don't. Anyway, psilocybin is
Anyway,
cool.
do heroin.
Yeah.
Drugs
you're
are bad.
psilocybin, you're
Don't
gonna
do
you're
drugs.
gonna do everything.
Yeah, drugs are bad. I'm not gonna do heroin. I'll never do a hard drug in my life, but yeah, I might try some psilocybin at some point.
But Aaron Rodgers does the craziest things. Like he will do that weird, like, cactus extract that like puts you into like a crazy state where you like shit yourself and puke yourself for like 3 days straight, and then you're high for 4 days straight.
Ayahuasca stuff.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, but
He
that's
does like bloodletting. He does a lot of crazy shit.
he's a weird dude.
He does a lot of crazy shit.
He's a weird dude. He's a weird dude.
If he had gone into distilling though, he'd be worshipped, because like those are always the crazy guys that like turn into icons, right?
Like
Yeah.
You gotta have that weird edge to you.
shaman guy.
That's kind of every
The,
like industry, the arts.
Yeah, I remember when we met with Compass Box, one of the things, they have there's been some changes there, and there's a lot of new staff, and it was weird because I think like I had worked with the brand the longest of anyone at the table, because I've been around kind of for like 12 years with the brand. And they were kind of asking me like, what are the types of things that like Compass Box could do? And like the first thing that came to mind was like, I always think of like John Glazer as kind of being almost like the Anthony Bourdain of whiskey. Like, he was kind of like our captain a little bit for those of us that like got in the last 20 years. Like, like he needs to be in, and I actually told him, I'm like, he needs to be more truculent, as Brian Burke would say, like you need that personality. You need that's what works in the whiskey business, right? That's a lot of the charisma that's come with Scotch. Now, Gordon and MacPhail hasn't really gone down this road, but there's been a lot of personalities that, because of that character, have put brands on their back and kind of built a following based on that.
I'm a strong believer in people like sharing the same wavelength. And I know that sounds like mystical and crazy, but I was watching, and my wife likes to watch our wedding video on our anniversary, and it was our 12th year anniversary the other day. Believe it or not.
Nice. Wow.
Crazy.
Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. And we were listening to it, and in my speech, I bring up Brian Burke, and I talk about truculence, and like the fact that you brought that up tonight, which I think I haven't heard that since like Brian Burke was the GM of the Leafs.
Right.
I don't know. Does he even use that terminology anymore?
That's probably not a real word. Who in the whiskey business would you say strikes you as being truculent? Other
Who
than
in the what's his name from Brook Laddie? Where he left
Jimmy
Brook
McEwen, obviously.
Jimmy McEwen, yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy McEwen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who else? That's a good question.
Yeah, from that like older generation, I feel like there was quite a lot.
I think who
Willie Tate from Jura, the old master distiller of Jura, was a lot like that. I would argue that who was the master distiller at Ardbeg and Glenmoe? He's still there. Doctor.
Yeah.
Am I drawing a blank?
I'm drawing a blank as well.
Whiskey brain.
I'll put it on the screen.
Yep.
Yeah, well, Jeremy, I'll throw it up there.
And everyone will be like, these guys are total idiots for the most famous guy. And
yeah, he's up there. Who has a good, you could tell is a big set on him and is not afraid to take chances, is the owner and master distiller of Macalones.
Oh yes.
Yeah, he's truculent. That's
yes. Yeah. Yeah, you could tell.
Graham, right?
Graham, yeah. Great dude.
Yeah.
Great dude.
Yeah.
There's a bunch out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know this is hard because like picking your children, who's your favorite? You might have one, you might not, but it's hard to say it out loud. But what would be your favorite Gordon MacPhail bottling in the last 5 years?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think it raises an even bigger question, which is that, like how we learn to love whiskey is by, again, like, by trying all these different things. And like Gordon MacPhail kind of opens this door where you suddenly get to have like this wider breadth of intake, of like context, where you kind of feel like, okay, like I now have a greater sense of what Highland Park is, and if like what I like about it, what I don't, that I wouldn't have gotten just by trying the OBs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, in essence, like going along for the journey with Gordon MacPhail over a period of time and like tasting different expressions, like clearly gives you this kind of like wider stance on the Scotch world at large. It just does. It expands your palate, and it gives you perspective on things that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And obviously independent bottlers in general, like the bulk of trying them all and trying different distilleries and different ones. So that does kind of tie back into why Gordon and MacPhail might realize like that ability to do that is being filled in other ways now, for sure.
Yeah.
But I probably would, if I could like go into their warehouse and like really get into some cool stuff, like I probably would be very tempted to start at the Highland Park section.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I would love to try like an older Gordon MacPhail Highland Park.
Yeah, and no, they're all amazing. Like all the ones from the 80s that I've tried. I've never tried anything older than that, but I've tried 3 or 4 different 80s ones, and they've all been just like, they just check every box for me. And
this is like
where I'd start, and it's personal because of this cask that I picked, of course, too.
Yeah. I think this happens to me a lot recently, where we've been forgetting a lot of the stuff that we've tried, and I'm pretty certain Jasper has poured us a Gordon MacPhail Highland Park 30-year-old. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah. So the distillery labels range, right? Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. Well, Macallan is essentially one of those, but like things like this, right? So this is like an example of a current one. Nice. Where like there was a period of time, like we were talking about this earlier, where like Gordon MacPhail was essentially the place where you'd go to get like Glen Grant single malt, Macallan single malt. And of course, I had this older bottle, Glenlivet.
Yeah.
Right. So if you wanted to go and get a Glenlivet single malt, this is where you got it from. Was you didn't go to the Glenlivet or the Glenlivet's distributor, which is like whatever, Corby's. Like, you would go to Gordon MacPhail.
Yeah.
So that was true of other brands too, like Highland Park, Pulteney, that you just don't see anymore.
True.
So yeah, that Highland Park 30 probably was part of a range like that.
Yeah, it was 30 or 31. It happened.
Well,
no, I'm not imagining
the truth with Gordon MacPhail too. If you're really going to get like into your absolute favorites, like there is some cookies deep in that cookie jar that are just, yeah, like, we tried a few years ago a Glenvore 1966 sample. Like,
yeah,
that was like out of this world. It was like nothing I've ever tasted. So, they have stuff like that back there, but obviously those are the unicorns.
I feel like including the ones that we got to try thanks to you and Richard are not even fair. Like the one that we tried the other day,
80, the Glen Grant 70,
the Glen Grant 70, the Glen Grant.
Yeah, you take it for granted almost instantaneously, right?
Yeah.
Like you have this taste experience where you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know that was possible with this hobby.
No,
and then
exactly.
You kind of like have to like shift gears back into like doing the normal stuff and getting excited about it. And like, you almost have to compartmentalize that memory because it's like, it's almost not even real.
And to think, if I didn't have that Glenallachie 10-year-old batch 5, I think
was it batch? Happened.
It might not have happened.
I think if you go back to like the bottles,
the
bottles like if you've owned or I've owned, I mean, that Mortlock 87 stood out for us.
Oh yeah,
that was a huge one.
That was unreal.
Really good.
Still one of my favorite of all time.
Everything you see on the table in front of you right now is amazing.
Very good. The 55.5 still sticks out for me a lot.
Macallan.
Yeah. I feel like one of the benefits we've had at Gordon MacPhail is like the team and what they're selecting and bottling right now. Like they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of stuff squeaking past the gates that's like second tier.
You know what I love most about Gordon MacPhail is you see Macallan coming out with these incredible whiskeys. And like there are some really incredible whiskeys that Macallan comes out with. And they don't care to share that with like people like us. They don't care to share that with the guys that would truly appreciate those whiskeys. They don't give a shit. But
I'm trying. I wish I had more McSpey malt. And I mean, you guys probably see like I've got the Billy Walker 4-year-old up there. Like I wish I could share those even more. But...
No, but you've been so incredibly generous with us. And like guys, even like Richard, like the guy's sitting at a table with us.
He's so generous
at a restaurant in Toronto. And he's like giddy about like passing us a bottle of like a 60-year-old Gordon MacPhail. Well, how old was that? 70-year-old. My bad. Glen Grant, Gordon MacPhail. And he's like, yeah, pour it yourself. And I pour myself some. And you can see in the video, I look up and he's like, pour more. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I can't pour more. He's like, no, you Pour more.
Not worthy of pouring more.
So yeah, no, and like it's just like
Oh, I absolutely
unbelievable
love Richard.
generosity.
Yeah, I know. I still, you have to kind of pinch yourself.
Right? Seriously though,
We're
you
always
do.
like super like envious of his position because he gets to go around and share whiskey that like his grandparent like bottled or barreled like so long ago, right? Like
I just, I
Yeah.
find that really hard to be envious of like a guy that's just doing it right. You know what I mean? Like I'm just so happy for him. Like it's just like it's
Yeah.
like wow.
Yeah, it
like
does seem
this,
like they could have squandered this. They
right.
absolutely could have. Like
Yeah.
that's what we shouldn't take for granted. And they like even the fact that they built the systems in their family to kind of like protect the business and like like the CEO that is leaving early next year, Ewan, like I met him. He's like just a brilliant, inspirational guy. Like, and they just all work together. It seems like the company's just in a good place.
So James, concluding on this Gordon MacPhail announcement, because like it did take a lot of people, kind of by storm. And I think that we felt like, oh man, like that's too bad because we really like Gordon MacPhail's products, and I don't think we've ever had a bad one. Even their younger, more inexpensive stuff was always great. Where is the industry heading with independent bottlers? Like, do you see it still being really relevant and continuing to be strong for like the whiskey enthusiast person who wants to venture out beyond the official bottlings and find stuff that's more niche and more different? Or are we going towards the
I think
end
it
here?
looks a little bit different. I think that like look at how the SMWS has evolved as a brand, right? They used to be one independent bottler in kind of this group of independent bottlers. I think you're going to start seeing more different independent bottlers. Like, would you say that Signatory and SMWS are like fit in the same category anymore? I kind of wouldn't. And to take that a step further, would you say that Lost Lantern and Gordon MacPhail are in the same category? Like they're doing such different things,
Yeah.
and that divergence is going to continue. So, like Cadenheads might truly become, especially with like they sell a lot of product on their website now. Like they could be a company that has these 3 retail shops and then sells releases online, and that could be their business model. And then likewise, like Gordon MacPhail could be the company that has a seeming endless supply of like 30 and 40 and 50-year-old whiskey when we're like telling our grandkids like, oh, you should remember like
Right.
when Gordon MacPhail had these 80-year-old Glenlivets, and it'll be like, things will shift. The amount of options is just going to keep going up. Like just look at the craft beer world, just look at the wine world, and that's your preview. Someone made the analysis. I can't remember who I heard this from, but that basically you think of the wine world like it used to be just like kind of France and Italy, right? And then all of a sudden you had these like new upstarts from like Australia and California and South America, and people were like, the French and the Italians kind of like shrugged them off, and then there's that big judgment of Paris where like the California wines beat the French wines, and they kind of like were basically caught with their pants down. But fast forward 20 years from that or 30 years from that, and everybody won. Like there was room for everything. And I think that's the journey whiskey's going on. I think that we have all the pieces in place now. Like there is shelter points, there is these distilleries in Europe, there is distilleries now in England, and like all these like dozens of new distilleries in Ireland. Like you're gonna have much more regionality, you're gonna have much more, like I could foresee where like, heaven forbid the LCBO ever privatizes and you guys have decent whiskey shops there. Like you could have a totally separate, awesome whiskey shop that had a completely separate, totally awesome whiskey shop in Victoria. Like that's where I think we're going. Whereas like the way it's been the last 20 or 30 years, it's like, everyone has Macallan 12 and it's there's kind of been a little bit of a predictability to it. I think that's going away. I think you're going to have a lot more diversity.
Yeah. I always had that dream about owning like a whiskey shop, but then I realized that I'm so biased towards like single malt that like
you couldn't stock it
I couldn't do
properly
it
for what people wanted.
the other day.
You don't have to apologize for that. People like Cabernet Sauvignon wine too. It's not going away.
I know, but so the other day I posted a little reel on Instagram of an octopus like hiding in a clamshell. I don't know if you saw that. Did you see it?
No.
So it's an octopus. It's It says bourbon guy, all scotch tastes the same.
Yeah.
Me, and then this octopus like closing a clamshell.
Right.
It's like hiding from this guy. And like I don't know. I can't get around some of the logic that is, and I hear it so often, and it's more often than I hear people knowing about single malt. And I don't think there's very many people that listen to our podcast that don't know, they know as much as we know about single malt. So that's why they're listening. And, it's just funny. It would be very tough to like sell anything above a certain price range in bourbon.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel you on that.
Would you
wanna
pay
pick?
Would you pay $300 for Michter's 10?
No.
That's the
So
price now.
I can't do it, and I like it. And I really do, actually. I think it's one of the better bourbons. But the problem with paying $300 for Michter's 10 is I know that there's a $300 bottle of scotch that I would way prefer.
I would say
Yeah.
any of these, right?
Yeah.
Are these all under $300?
Almost all of
think they
them
all
except
are.
for the Spey malt
malt
and
more.
the Kalila, I believe, was close to 400, was it not?
You could probably get it for $350.
Yeah.
There you go.
So there you go.
So these will outdrink that bourbon any day of the week.
All of them.
Yeah.
At least for the three of us.
Yeah, for
But,
us. And that's the thing, right? Like,
No, I
gotta
understand for the bourbon drinker.
I try to be careful because I get it. Like taste is
I get it too.
subjective. You know what I mean? I try to be careful, and I get it, and I don't want to sound ignorant by saying this is better. But we've tried like the top of the top when it comes to bourbon.
Yeah. And we haven't come close to trying the top of the top when it comes to scotch.
And we haven't, no.
And we've tried what we've tried, and we still would say it blows bourbon away.
It annihilates.
Well, maybe the way to wrap this up is to think about, taking this back to Gordon and MacPhail. And, they were faced with this dilemma very recently, right? When they released the Glenlivet 80-year-old. And, they released it at 80,000 pounds. Like they had never done anything like that before. But at the end of the day, like you kind of, even for them, they kind of had to go outside their bubble and realize like, yeah, it's not, I don't think they were really comfortable, to be honest. Like, yes, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, they made lots of money off that. But it's like, I don't think deep down they were truly comfortable with that. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like for someone, when I was there in person, when the name was drawn to win the 80-year-old in Vancouver, I don't know if I've ever seen someone that excited in my life.
Wow.
Like, the woman that won it, she told me, I said, I talked to her and I said, like, why was it so special to you? And she's like, I grew up with nothing. My family doesn't have heirlooms. We don't have a story. She's like, this is a real thing that I now own. And like, she was emotional.
For
and
sure.
I was like, you know what? I don't think about whiskey that way, but like, that doesn't mean that someone can't. And that doesn't actually have that value. So
absolutely,
for them.
She potentially picked something up that could be worth $1 million one day.
There you go.
Right.
But more importantly, she goes to sleep at night and knows that there's something that is like completely unique that she was a part of.
Yeah.
And
absolutely,
that actually has real value to her. But
that's
probably someone will sell for $1 million.
Right. Someone's going to sell it for $1 million.
Exactly. For sure.
It is like winning the lottery when you win a bottle like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible investment because the moment you walk out of the store with that bottle, it's already doubled.
Yeah, hopefully she just won't toss it 30 feet in the air and try to catch it.
We were actually joking about that in Toronto.
Richard was like, yeah, they didn't like that. I'm like, yeah, no shit, they didn't like that.
Yeah, of course.
I think if you could tie Richard to a lie detector, I think he thought that was clever. But
yeah,
I'm not sure the crystal glass blowers were so convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was
if
hilarious.
you like spend an entire day of your life like hand blowing that decanter, you might have a dartboard with Mike Brisebois head on it.
You're like, who is this fucking guy?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that much on this channel.
If you're unfamiliar, I'll throw the picture up here. And try that 80-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, it's really one of the all-time pictures in whiskey, period. Like, it just...
I could see that. Yeah. Man. And it didn't... Like, we should, like...
photographer taking the photo.
Yeah. We should say that, it didn't have the whiskey inside.
True. It was a mock whiskey.
Yeah.
Real bottle.
Real bottle.
Yeah.
Real bottle that they used to bottle the 80-year-old, but not the actual whiskey. Still crazy.
So, end of the day, Gordon MacPhail is not going anywhere for a very long time. They're still going to be
Very
bottling
long
lots of
time.
great stuff. The independent bottling market is not in disarray. There's still going to be lots of good independent bottlings out there, but maybe just not the range of distilleries that we're used to seeing. Would you say
Yeah.
that's fair?
Yeah, there is more whiskey in casks right now globally than there has ever been in history. We will be fine.
Right. Yeah. So maybe some new distilleries in the independent bottling market, but the old giants, the old ones, maybe not so much anymore.
No, they're getting greedy. They want to keep it.
They want to keep it for themselves, which makes sense, I think, as well.
It's fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. James, it's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us and giving us so much insight into the industry.
Yeah, we are always privileged to have you on this podcast. And
I'm running out of old bottlings though, guys. I can't promise you.
What did we reference that you might have before, like an old Glenallachie 30?
30
Oh, yeah,
batch
we're
one.
Like maybe James has a Glenallachie 30 batch one.
Oh,
he
I
wants to
wish.
send our
I have
way.
no 21s or 30s, guys. I'm sorry. Those are, even for me, that's a tough one.
yeah, no,
I probably should have made it happen, but oh well.
it's all good, man. You've been more
There's
than
enough other cool stuff.
far too generous.
A
So
lifetime.
I'll be
of
honest,
gratitude, for sure.
As a final note, I like the Billy Walker 4-year-old better than the
Yeah.
30. That's just
There you
me.
go.
really,
Yeah.
that's a big. So, can you tell us if there's older whiskey inside?
Let's end the podcast here, and then when we go offline, I'll tell you guys some of the secrets of that stuff.
Beautiful. I
Okay.
like that.
I think for the price, you can definitely assume that there's more than just 4-year-old whiskey.
Yeah, Billy Walker doesn't mess around. let's be honest. He's not ripping anybody off. That guy knows what he's doing.
Thanks so much for watching. Much appreciated. Give us a comment, throw down a like. Gordon MacPhail, what do you think about this news? Leave us a comment down below. And until next time, guys, we will talk to you then.
Salute.
Cheers.
So first of all, this is 100% just 4-year-old distilled by Billy Walker.
Oh wow.
So this is from like the first run of peated that they did.
Sorry, there's nothing older in there than 4?
No, well, there can't be. There was no peated whiskey before this first distillation, right? They only started distilling in 2018.
What's the ppm on
Yeah,
that?
but you can just blend some new peated stuff with like a bunch of old stuff.
Kind of like he did with McNair's.
But that's what McNair's is.
Yeah.
But he
So-
didn't do it in this.
To be honest, this is going to sound crazy. I genuinely believe that 5 years from now, when you say Glenallachie, you're going to think peated Scotch, not sherry Scotch.
That's crazy. That's scary to me actually, because I love
Yeah,
what
it
he's
is.
done.
Because the sherry stuff is so good. This is even better. I'm not joking.
That's crazy.